In a disgusting about-face, convicted felon Donald Trump on Sunday posted on Truth Social the following regarding the Epstein Files. Quote, House Republicans should vote to release the Epstein Files because we have nothing to hide. And it's time to move on from this Democrat hoax perpetrated by radical left lunatics in order to deflect from the great success of the Republican Party, including our recent victory on the Democrat shutdown. The Department of Justice has already turned over tens of thousands of pages to the public on Epstein, I don't know why that's in quotes, are looking at various Democrat operatives, Bill Clinton, Reid Hoffman, Larry Summers, etc., and their relationship to Epstein, and the House Oversight Committee can have whatever they are legally entitled to. I don't care. Now, let me be clear, it goes on with total fucking nonsense. But the reason why I wanted to start today's episode with that language is Trump says we can get it, then we're going to get it. But of course, nothing is ever straight with this guy, right? And he's trying to play us for the fool. He's trying to gaslight Americans, more specifically, his supporters, into thinking that, quote, I have nothing to hide, it should all be released. But let's talk about what are the built-in obstacles to the Epstein Files being released, despite Donald Trump claiming that he can just snap his fingers and make it happen, although technically he really could. So let's start with the fundamental. One, the fact that on Friday, Trump ordered his Department of Justice, led by Pamela Joe, law lackey extraordinaire, to be able to investigate only Democrats that have some relationship to the Epstein Files. I mean, forget the fact that he himself has been identified now hundreds, if not thousands of times within the Epstein Files in terms of his involvement with, as well as connection to Jeffrey Epstein and others. But no, let's just only investigate the Democrats. And as other people have aptly noted, in doing so, he's in theory reopened the criminal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. But why was that investigation closed to begin with? Oh gosh, let's go back and look and see when that happened. On November 3rd, Representative Jamie Raskin sent this incredible letter to Pamela Joe at the DOJ. And this is how it starts. Why would the Trump administration, the Department of Justice, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation kill an ongoing criminal investigation into a massive and decades-long criminal sex trafficking ring that preyed on girls and young women? Who exactly are you intending to protect by this action? The letter goes on to state, until January of 2025, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York was running an active investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's co-conspirators. In January, SDNY prosecutors were ordered to transfer the Epstein case files to DOJ headquarters in Washington, D.C. Now, the investigation into co-conspirators has inexplicably ceased, and no further investigative steps appear to have been taken. And then Representative Raskin cites to what? That now infamous July 7th FBI memorandum that was issued that says, quote, we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. So let's recap that for a second. After Trump gets sworn into office in January of 2025, the SDNY stops any investigation and into any potential co-conspirators of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. The file itself is then transferred from the Southern District of New York. Why was it there in the first place? Well, y'all will recall that the SDNY indicted Jeffrey Epstein in July of 2019, and he was facing federal criminal charges when he died mysteriously. The file gets transferred from SDNY in January of 2025 to where? Main Justice in Washington, D.C., the Department of Justice where Pamela Joe is located. So when that happens, not only is there no continuing investigation into any potential co-conspirators, but what else? Everything ends. And then we see the kind of exclamation point to the ending of that investigation in July when the FBI memo is released claiming there's nothing there. There's no one left to investigate. So of course it begs the question, why is Donald Trump ordering the DOJ to basically reopen an investigation that he closed into, quote, only the Democrats? Because obviously, he has seen what has happened. Adelita Grijalva finally got sworn in by House Speaker Mike Johnson. She was the 218th signature on that discharge petition. It is now going to force the vote this week of the full House to be able to get a bill eventually passed into law that would order the DOJ to release the entirety of the Epstein files. Now, what's a potential obstacle to that? There's two of them, folks, at a minimum. One is the United States Senate. If the U.S. Senate doesn't take up this bill and vote on it, then it'll never get across the finish line. Even then, in order to be signed into law, Donald Trump, as the president, has to not veto it. But look, we all know that the Epstein Files issue has become political kryptonite for the Republicans. We've seen defections from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene in this instant to be able to say that she supports the transparency behind this. We've seen people like Thomas Massey go on the Sunday morning shows to talk about why he doesn't understand that if this is a, quote, Democrat hoax, as we just saw in Donald Trump's Truth Social post, why are we investigating a hoax if it's a hoax? Because Donald Trump wants to bury this now under a claim that because it is now an open investigation that we can't get the Epstein files released. We all know that this is just a game for Donald Trump, and he thinks that he's playing some version of chess to outsmart not only Democrats in Congress, but the American people. But we see through this smokescreen, don't we? And we see exactly why he is trying to tee it up so transparently the way that he did. But let's talk about who is going to be conducting this, quote, investigation into the hoax, but still an investigation. I mean, what a colossal waste of time. He has called upon a guy by the name of Jay Clayton. Do you want to know who Jay Clayton is? Well, Jay Clayton is currently the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. Now let's get a little bit into who Jay Clayton is, because Jay Clayton is about to have a come to Jesus moment for himself as to whether or not he's just going to be lining up in the long line of law lackeys and personal lawyers for Donald Trump to do his bidding. So Jay Clayton, corporate lawyer who had never been a prosecutor until he took over the Southern District of New York at Donald Trump's request in April of 2025. Now, why did that happen? If you'll recall, the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York resigned. Her name was Danielle Sassoon. She resigned along with other very credible, talented federal prosecutors from the SDNY when they got pressured by whom? Emil Bovee, to be able to get rid of the criminal charges pending at the time against Mayor Eric Adams in New York. And you'll also recall that there were lawyers at Main Justice in D.C. that resigned in protest because they felt like they were under pressure, trying to be influenced by Bovee, Todd Blanche, and the Department of Justice to get rid of these charges against Eric Adams. And so they said, our ethics, our morals, and our professional responsibility dictate that we do not participate and be complicit in what is being asked. So Jay Clayton gets this coveted role as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. He was the SEC chair in Trump term 1.0. Again, corporate lawyer, not a prosecutor. Sound familiar, right? So here we go. Apparently, Clayton had no idea, according to the New York Times, that when Maureen Comey was canned and fired from her job as a federal prosecutor in Clayton's own office, he had no freaking clue it was going to happen. He was totally blindsided by it. Now, Maureen Comey is obviously relevant to this conversation, right? Because Comey was the lead trial lawyer on the Ghislaine Maxwell case. Maureen Comey also was on the Jeffrey Epstein case. And you guys know, because we've talked about it here at this channel, that Maureen Comey was the federal prosecutor who should have sat down with Ghislaine Maxwell instead of Todd Blanche in that 9-hour boondoggle that Blanche did with Ghislaine Maxwell. And we also know that Ghislaine Maxwell lied when she spoke to Todd Blanche. And how do we know that? Well, the emails and everything that has been produced by the Epstein estate so far that are implicating Donald Trump directly have also implicated Ghislaine Maxwell in her lies. But have we seen Pamela Jo's DOJ racing to file charges against Ghislaine Maxwell for making false statements not only to Todd Blanche, but to FBI agents that were present at the time? Of course not. Because in doing so, what would happen? I don't know. You might poke the hornet's nest that it's Ghislaine Maxwell, and maybe suddenly she's going to realize that that commutation pitch that she's going to be doing, that it's not going to be granted if she actually says the truth about Donald Trump and others. So, Maureen Comey gets fired a week before that Todd Blanche sit-down with Ghislaine Maxwell. And according to this Times article, like I said, Clayton had no freaking clue that this was going to happen. Can you imagine? You run an office, you're running the personnel, and somebody gets fired, especially a skilled top prosecutor who handles major sex crimes cases, and you have no idea? Does that seem like they have respect for your discretion and your ability to lead that office? Now look. As I said, Donald Trump has now ordered this, quote, investigation into the Democrats and their connections to Jeffrey Epstein. And he said to Pamela Jo, and Pamela Jo said, great, we're going to put Jay Clayton on it, right? Although, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the Epstein file went from SDNY to Main Justice in D.C. I guess it's going to go back to the SDNY. Do you think maybe it'll get lost in the transport? Maybe it'll mysteriously disappear? So, Trump demanded that Epstein's involvement and relationship, and that was in quotes, with former President Bill Clinton, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, a Democratic donor and the founder of LinkedIn, and the banking institution JP Morgan Chase, and quote, many other people and institutions must occur. Now, you want to hear a very interesting wrinkle? Jay Clayton has never served as personal counsel for Donald Trump, unlike Todd Blanche, Pamela Jo, Alina Habba, Lindsay Halligan, Emile Beauvais, and others. But who has Jay Clayton represented in his prior iteration of his career? Reid Hoffman. Reid Hoffman is a former client. So riddle me this, Jay. How are you going to deal with that conflict of interest in your own office? Are you just going to say, to hell with it? I don't give a fuck. I'm just going to do it because Donald Trump told me to do it? Well, here's another thing to consider, right? Jay Clayton could potentially assign this, quote, reopened investigation into the Epstein case to his public corruption unit, right? But that public corruption unit is the one that has already been involved in dealing with things like Eric Adams. First of all, I don't know who's left in that PC unit. I have no idea. But do you really think that federal prosecutors are now going to sign on to this type of bullshit, total ridiculous investigation into only Democratic donors? It flies in the face of every prosecutor's oath of office. You are not supposed to do selective and vindictive prosecutions. We've seen the motions, fast and furious, that have been filed in Tish James, James Comey, LaMonica McIver's cases, right? We know that they exist. We know that the law is there to be able to protect against these things. So are the federal prosecutors in the SDNY's public corruption unit going to say, you know what? I'm going to sign on to this as well. We know exactly what's happening as well, even in the Southern District of Florida, with those subpoenas that have been issued for people like Peter Strzok and James Brennan, right? We've had AUSAs resign because they're not going to be a part of those investigations. You're going to risk your bar license for convicted felon Donald Trump? In this New York Times article, a question was asked of the number 2 official in the U.S. Attorney's offices in Manhattan and Brooklyn, a guy named Matthew Fishbein. He's no longer in those roles, and he was asked, you know, what is the Attorney General going to do about this? But then he said the following, and I loved this question. I wanted to share it with all of you. Matthew Fishbein said this, quote, if they take a deeper dive here, as in the federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York into the Epstein investigation, but they uncover evidence which implicates the president or people close to the president, are they going to be instructed to ignore it? End quote. It's a great question, right? You and I all know what the answer is. I don't even have to say it out loud. It is a foregone conclusion that this attempt to reopen the Epstein investigation and some appearance by Trump yesterday telling all of the House Republicans to vote in support of releasing the Epstein files is just a total smokescreen gaslighting moment where Trump thinks that the American people are too stupid to appreciate the nuance. And frankly, it doesn't even have to be that nuanced, does it? He announces the Democratic investigation into the hoax of the Epstein files on Friday, and then on Sunday says, go ahead and release the files, knowing that the claim is going to be made by Pamela Joe and the DOJ, that because this new investigation has been reopened, it's an open investigation, we can't release the files. Even Massey called that out on the Sunday shows, saying it's all a smokescreen. People, this is the reason why we have to keep the pressure on. This is the reason why we need to actually appreciate when somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and again, I have said, honey, I'm not inviting her to the Thanksgiving table, but I can appreciate it when she actually realizes that her conscience dictates that she support the release of these files. And whether or not, at the end of the day, Donald Trump is directly implicated in either the abuse, the trafficking, and the crimes themselves. Maybe it's only that he's doing it to hide and to protect big donors of his and other people. Whatever the reasons are, we're entitled to know. We deserve to know. But you know who deserves it more than us? It's the victims and the survivors of Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others. They deserve more. They have been treated like crap on the ground since the beginning by the Southern District of Florida's office, which clearly violated the Victims' Crimes Rights Act, right? Violated that. They have been completely abused along the way, and the re-traumatization of these victims and survivors happens in real time every single day as we talk about this case, as we talk about the fact that there hasn't been true accountability for them. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to play the following PSA that has been released by some of the victims. It is hair-raising, sobering, and just tragic that we have come to this. But I want you to watch and listen to this PSA because it's an incredibly powerful thing. And I urge you, just like the PSA does, to contact your members of Congress and demand that they vote in support of the release of the Epstein files and that we keep the pressure on to make sure that we achieve the transparency that these Epstein files must have. Be mad, be outraged, demand accountability, and watch this PSA.
I suffered so much pain.
So much pain.
So much pain.
I suffered so much pain. I was 14 years old.
I was 16 years old.
I was 16,
17.
14 years old.
This is me.
This was me.
This is me.
When I met Jeffrey Epstein.
This is me when I met Jeffrey Epstein.
There are about 1,000 of us.
It's time to bring the secrets out of the shadows. It's time to shine a light into the darkness.
Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.